Okay, hi everybody. I'm Kristen Body. I'm the Membership and Events Manager at the Asheville Art Museum. I'm so glad you could all take some time out of your day to join us. We have a smaller group for today's program, which is actually great. I hope it can lead to some interesting discussion that's not possible with a larger group. And today's program is being led by Preparator and Assistant Registrar Tom Schram and Assistant Registrar Chris Whitten. So thank you both for being here today. Before I turn this over to you, I just want to go over some housekeeping for all of our attendees. So first, your microphones are muted and video is off by default. You should note that we are recording today's program, and if you prefer not to be recorded, please make sure that your audio and video remain off. You can make sure of this by looking at the bottom left-hand corner. Both the microphone and video camera symbols should have red lines through them to indicate that they're off. And this recording will be shared in tomorrow's museum e-blast. Next, I also just wanted to let you know that we do welcome questions and comments during the program. So if you would like to ask a question at any point during the program, you can do so by first typing your question or comment into the chat box, which you should find at the bottom of your screen. And I do encourage you to ask as we go. It just keeps the conversation flowing. The second option is to use the raise hand button, which you'll find by clicking on participants at the bottom of your screen. When there's time, I will call on anyone with a raised hand and unmute your audio so you can speak directly to Tom and Chris. And finally, if you feel that there's anything we can do to improve these programs in Zoom, please do let us know. I'll send you a program evaluation this afternoon so you can share your feedback with me that way, or you can feel free to email me directly. And thank you again for being here. And now I will turn this over to Tom and Chris.
Thank you, Kristen. As Kristen said, my name is Tom Schram. I'm the preparator and assistant registrar here at the Asheville Art Museum. I actually started here at the Art Museum back in 2006 as a contract art handler, and I worked here for about 3.5 years in that role before I left to go to grad school and travel around for a while, and I made my way back to Asheville in 2016 and started here in my current role in 2017. So I've been the full-time preparator and assistant registrar since then, just in time to help us move back into our finished construction new building.
Hi everyone, my name is Chris Whitten. I'm the assistant registrar for the Asheville Art Museum. I've been with the museum for just a little bit over 3 years now. I oversee all aspects of care of the collection. What that means is that I talk about or I primarily look at the different various documentations, overseeing gift contracts, condition reports, cataloging, as well as overseeing the long-term care of the object while it's within the museum's care. So today I want to talk to you about the best ways that you yourself can care for your own collection. And the best way to do that is through preventive conservation. Preventive conservation is the proactive steps that you yourself can take, and primarily to care for your own collection. So it's not someone who is an outsider coming in to take care of your collection. It's you and the tasks that you can do in order to ensure that you are prolonging the life of your collection. So the topics we're going to be covering today are handling, climate control, which looks at temperature and humidity, lighting, integrated pest management, display through exhibition, and then the long-term storage. So first we're going to start with handling. If you haven't noticed my hands, or if you've seen me or my colleague Tom, we're oftentimes wearing gloves. And these happen to be nitrile gloves. The museum world has really moved away from latex gloves due to the fact that a lot of people are allergic to latex. The reason why we wear gloves is because our bodies secrete different types of oils, so sebaceous glands. These salts and oils on our fingertips, when you touch something, and if it's not been properly removed, they will cause long-term damage. So that is the main reason why we wear gloves. Besides the fact that you can wear nitrile gloves, another option is cotton gloves. With cotton gloves, people tend to feel more comfortable as opposed to wearing the nitrile. But the thing with cotton gloves, unless you have bumpers, like grippers on the end of the fingertips, it's sometimes difficult to handle glazings on ceramics such as that. Another issue with cotton gloves is that they should be routinely washed, and obviously other factors such as what type of detergent or however you decide to wash it could potentially rub off or get put onto the object that you were handling. A lot of people don't realize that you can actually handle objects if you actually wash your hands before you do. That doesn't last all day. Again, our bodies are continuously secreting different types of oils. So as long as you've got clean washed hands, you can touch objects. In the museum, there are signs that say, please do not touch. So even though if you wash your hands, we just ask that you do not wash your hands. So these are two examples of the long-term damage that can be caused by touching. The photo on the left is a bronze statue of Juliet from William Shakespeare. It's in Italy, and you can actually see the discoloration, this almost orange rustic brown on the arm, the breast, the torso. This is from so many people touching this bronze statue. So just because it's a statue and it's outside, it's able to handle all the elements of rain and things like that, our fingerprints have literally caused this much damage to this bronze statue. And the article this came from mentioned that the statue ended up going into conservation, and the city ended up purchasing a replica, which cost the city $27,000. So this is a good example of where just because it's outdoors doesn't mean that you should be touching it. The object on the right, I studied over in England, and this is actually a carved stone snake at the British Museum. I'm unsure of what stone it is, but you can see that I've circled, as well as if you look at the rattle of the tail and the head where the snout is, it's discolored. It's very smooth. The texture is very sleek. That is, that's oils that have been rubbed off from people continuously touching. And in fact, at the bottom of that picture, you can vaguely see where a sign says, please do not touch. Another reason why we wear gloves is to protect ourselves from the object. So one of the biggest things is taxidermy. So up until the mid to late 1970s, almost all of taxidermy is full of different types of toxic metals. Mercury, arsenic, all these are very deadly to us. So essentially when you go to museums like natural history museums such as this, you will see them basically encased in these glass cases. It's because they almost never come out because they are very deadly. So that's another reason why you want to sometimes just wear gloves to ensure that you are protecting yourself.
So Chris talked a little bit about bad touching, let's call it. And I want to talk a little bit about necessary touching in terms of handling the work, moving it from place to place. In an art museum, for the most part, that's kind of the riskiest time, is as a work is moving from storage into installation, or it just got shipped to us and we're sort of unpacking it and putting it into storage. So for the most part, artwork can be broken into 2D work and 3D work. 2D work comes in a lot of different types. It could just be a single sheet of paper. This is a photograph with a piece of interleaving over top of it. As you can see, as I'm holding it, I'm trying to support it underneath rather than just carry it by pinching a corner or holding it upright with some kind of pressure. It also has this interleaving over the top just because you never know what can happen while you're moving, right? Someone could just come up and start talking to you and spittle or anything could, you know, come out. And you don't really, you want to sort of protect the face of the work at all times. Paper is generally flexible, so it can sag in the center a little bit, usually without creating any kind of problem. But when it becomes really floppy and sort of bends in two different axes, that's when you're going to get a crease in it somewhere. So it's really important to sort of support underneath. If you have a board or something like that that you could move this work around on, that would be ideal. But if you're moving it from one place to another, getting underneath and supporting the paper is the best way to handle this kind of unframed work. Chris? So here are two more types of two-dimensional work. One is a framed piece that's under glazing, and the other is an unframed canvas. For both of these examples, I'm not touching the face of the work. I'm trying to hold around the edge. I'm trying to support underneath. You can see that my left hand is on the bottom corner. Most of the weight is being held by those fingers. And then the top hand is controlling sort of the forward and backward of the work. Staying around the edges helps to keep any damaging pressure away from the face. I think everybody recognizes that you wouldn't want to touch the face of this unframed canvas, because even with gloves, you know, the friction of your fingers could rub something off or damage the paint. But even with a glazed piece, you don't want to put pressure against the glazing. If it's glass, it could break. If it's plexiglass, it could bend in and touch the front of the piece and cause some kind of damage there. So we try to keep our hands around the edge and control the work as best we can from there. Chris? Here we have an unglazed work that's in a rather large frame. So the frame becomes a good place to get a grip on the painting. This frame is made of wood, so it's going to be difficult to do any kind of serious damage just by holding the frame. If this were a gilded frame or had really ornate small elements to it, then I would not be holding the painting by this. I'd be doing more of a cradle, like you saw me holding the black frame and the unframed canvas. As I'm moving this work from one place to another, you see that I'm holding it pretty close to my chest, and I have the face in, right? So all of those are levels of control and protection that I have over the piece. So I can keep an eye on where the face is, that it's not coming in contact with anything. Many times paintings, stretched canvas will have some kind of backer board on them that will sort of protect the canvas from a bump or contact from the back. So the face is really kind of the most delicate edge, the most delicate side, and you want to kind of keep that to you so you can monitor what's happening. It's also, I'm not holding it out too far so that it stays close, and I can really control the situation as I move it from place to place. Chris? If a work is larger, much larger than the one that I just had in my hand, which was actually a very light piece, then it's going to take more people. This is a great shot of one of our art handlers, Ian and Chris, hanging the Hassan work in our collection gallery. And so anytime you get to something that is uncomfortable or unruly for one person to hold, you know, it's best to err on the side of caution and just bring more hands in. But again, you see them holding things in the same methodology, in the same technique, where they're holding along the side, they're maintaining support weight underneath, and then really lightly kind of controlling the top so that there's no kind of tipping as they're actually hanging this on the wall. Chris? So in terms of three-dimensional work, it's very tempting to hold something like this Mark Shapiro picture by the handle, but we don't ever hold things by the handles. You know, it's not that we don't trust the artist to have made it well. It's just that you can have more control and more stability if you use both your hands, one to hold all the weight and the other to control the tipping in the same way. So this particular picture has a nice neck. right in the center. I can get my hand around that and control it really well, and then hold the rest of the weight with the hand, my left hand underneath. Chris? So this really interesting wood sculpture called Untitled Critter, it has these legs, and when you display the work, it sits on the legs. So we know that the legs, they have structural support, they have weight carrying capability, but they are meant to hold the weight in a fixed and stable position. So you would never want to hold it by the legs as you're moving it from one place to another, right? When I pick it up, I want to look at the piece, figure out where all the weight is lying and where are the most stable places to grab the work. Most of the weight on this piece is in that center sort of body form. So going underneath that and picking up is the most stable way to control all of the weight of the piece. We have lots of different tools and equipment that help us move our artwork from one place to another. So with this Gorovich painting, it's resting on one of our A-frames, which is essentially an A-shaped cart that acts as kind of a mini wall that you can lean work against, especially unwrapped two-dimensional work. You can see that this A-frame has carpet on it. That's, you know, to pad the piece and sort of cushion it as we roll it around. This is one of the best ways to move unwrapped work, especially large 2D work, from one place to another. We also have flatbed carts and furniture dollies, which Chris. So this is a flatbed cart. The prep crew is using it here to bring in a sculpture by Tom Shields that was in our Appalachia Now exhibition. So this sculpture is made out of lots of different cast iron pieces. So it's very heavy and there aren't a lot of really good places to carry the weight with it, right? So we use lots of hands holding the legs, which are kind of the most supportive structure, to bring it down out of Tom's truck and put it onto this cart. And then we're going to roll it from there until we get it to the platform that it's going to live on, and then we'll move it one more time. So minimizing the amount of time that you're actually holding or supporting work like this is crucial. And that's why we use these kinds of tools like this flatbed cart. Chris? But the real rock star of kind of art moving equipment is, I call it the furniture dolly. It takes on a lot of different names depending on who is actually talking, but it's really this flexible tool that allows you to carry lots and lots of things. It's just kind of like a flat roller skate that you can put almost anything on. On the left side here, you see what's called a bin box. These are also industry standards. They're large bins that hold lots of different, that can hold lots of different work. And then on the right side, you can see one of our other prep crew, Jordan and Chris, again, moving this large packed piece by Gary Monroe that was also in Appalachia Now. So these carts have rubber bases that allow some friction so work can sit on them. And, you know, as long as you support what's happening up top, they act as that left hand underneath carrying all the weight, and you act as the right hand keeping things stable and supported, and then you just roll where you need to roll. When I was in New York, I worked for a professional art handling company, and this is what we had on the truck. This is sort of, this would cover almost every situation, these furniture dollies. Chris, if you'll. So you can use multiple dollies to get really large pieces like this Jared Sprecher piece, which also came in for our recent Appalachia Now exhibition. Again, you wouldn't really use these if the work wasn't wrapped, right? So all the pieces I've been showing you were either wrapped or they're in bins. And so this is kind of the chief way that we can move wrapped work around. I want to point out one other thing that I'm a little proud of. You see this Penske truck on the left side? That is the truck that we brought this painting here from Tennessee in. And you can see in it that I had to actually build this whole sort of leaning contraption to hold that painting because it's entirely too tall for the truck. So those boards went all the way back through the entire truck, and this painting leaned over on its side and sort of rested on those boards on an angle, right? It became like a tabletop, like a tilting draftsman tabletop that, that sort of cradled and held this painting throughout the trip. Chris, if you'll. So talking a little bit about trucks and professional art handlers, this large crate, which you can see we're also moving by furniture dollies. This large crate was brought to us by US Art. And anytime that you have work that's being moved on a long trip, those trucks are climate controlled. They maintain a certain level of temperature and humidity within their trucks, right? Because while things are moving, while they're traveling, they're still under the need to be climate regulated. So this crate came into us on a professional truck that was climate regulated. The packaging that a work is in acts as kind of a microclimate for that work while it's traveling. So when we get something like this crate in, we don't unpack it for 24 hours. Chris, if you'll advance this. So this is that same crate. It's several days later. We've let it kind of rest, right? And the issue with that is that whatever the climate was where it was packed, this was not packed at a museum. This was actually packed at a fabricator's studio. So the climate was slightly different than what you might find in a museum. And when you're talking about climate, you don't want things to shift really rapidly, right? So however the work was shipped, when it comes to us, we want to leave it in the crate for a little while. The crate, the cardboard box, any kind of wrapping, we leave it in there for at least 24 hours because it acts as a buffer and kind of slows down the change and only gradually brings the environment that's happening surrounding the work to the environment that we now have the packaging in. So this is after we've waited several days. We have this crate and we're getting ready to open it. Chris, if you'll. So this is what was inside the crate. This is Large Yellow Poppies by Donald Sultan, I think is the title. And I just wanted to point a few things out to you in terms of the packing and crating of this piece. First of all, there's not a lot of foam or padding within this crate, and that's because the piece itself is actually bolted to the bottom of the crate, so it's not going to go anywhere, right? That same technique, sort of stabilizing the bottom. And then the top hand, or the sort of tipping stabilize, is being done by this crossbar that's going, it's actually going on either side of this piece, and it has a rod that goes between the hole in the top flower. That crossbar is wrapped in Tyvek, and also this block that's kind of helping to support the weight of the leftmost large flower, that's wrapped in Tyvek as well. And Chris is going to talk a little more about archival materials, and he'll mention Tyvek. I just wanted to point it out to you in this instance while we have a good example of it. So climate, we've touched on that a little bit because we talked about moving a piece from one climate to another. Climate is crucial to sort of the safety and the longevity of artwork. This image on the right side is one of our art handling units here at the museum. It's like a real beefy air conditioner on steroids, right? We have 9 of these, I think, 8 or 9 of these air handling units. And these big guys will take care of temperature and humidity, and they'll handle multiple zones at one time. And then we have 10 or so smaller units that are called fan coil units, which are more like just a standard air conditioning unit that you might have at your house. So we have lots and lots of equipment. That's just the air handling. You know, we have chillers, cooling towers, boilers, a whole myriad of different water pumps. So we have a really large, complicated air handling system that helps keep our art spaces stable and consistent, because that's crucial. We have these numbers, temperature between 68 and 72 degrees and humidity between 40 and 60%. You know, those are best practice numbers given by the American Alliance for Museums. And so our sweet spot is trying to stay right around 70 degrees Fahrenheit and 50% humidity, which is what this really complicated machinery sort of allows us to do. Chris?
Yeah, so as Tom just mentioned, we follow best practices. These are standards set by the American Alliance of Museums. The Asheville Art Museum is accredited by the body, as well as we've been accredited for multiple decades. So that's quite an achievement on our part to make sure that we meet the best practices across the board. So as Tom mentioned, with dealing with temperature, which again, that's 70% is, 70 degrees is ideal. The cooler the temperature, the longer, depending on what the object is, but the cooler the temperature, the better it is for a majority of objects. There are even cold storages that some museums have, depending on what type of collection you have. Photographs are better served in cooler temperatures like 55 degrees, almost jacket weather type climates. With humidity, I would definitely say is probably one of the most detrimental things to a collection. And again, our goal is to get 50%. Again, best practice is between 40 and 60%. Anytime it gets less than 40%, you start worrying about it becomes too dry. There's not enough moisture in the air. You're worried about it basically vacuuming, sucking out the moisture from an object. So if it's a wood object, you're worried about it splitting. The wood can literally just crack on itself because there's not enough moisture in the air to keep it going. When there's too much moisture in the air, so whenever your humidity reaches beyond 65%, over a set amount of time, you're going to start dealing with mold growth. And I'll talk about that on the next slide. The image on the left is the backing board of a paperwork that shows signs of foxing. Foxing is a type of mold. It's not hazardous to us. Commonly, you'll find this in books, especially older antique books. If you find it in your book, it's probably best to keep that away from other books that don't have any type of foxing. Again, it's more of aesthetics than anything else. You can have a conservator to a certain point remove the foxing, depending on if there's a color in the image. You may be worried about losing some fading in there. But with that being said, foxing is not nearly as dangerous as what you would see on the image on the right. The image on the right is a painting, which again, this is an example from the Fine Arts Conservancy. You can literally see the white spores, the mold growth growing on this painting. This is very toxic, not just to the painting, but also you yourself. So if you see something like this, you definitely are going to want to seek professional assistance in trying to eliminate this potential hazard. I happen to like this graph. This graph came from Preventive Conservation Collection Storage, which came out last year. It basically is a great way that it shows how high humidity and the long-term effects over time can basically cause this mold to exacerbate, become worse. So I just want to point out is that 65%, which again is where you initially will hit that mold growth. And again, this is 65%, so let's just say your basement is sitting at 65%. If you don't start sucking the moisture out of that room after it says over a year, you will start seeing mold in your basement. Another good example is if it gets up to 70, 75%, in a couple of weeks, you start having mold at that point. So like I said, this is a very serious thing that many museums have to deal with, the fluctuation of outdoor temperatures as well as different seasons, of where you have to decide if when the best time is to make sure, if you don't have an HVAC system, you have a dehumidifier to suck moisture out, or you have a humidifier to pump moisture into the air.
So moving on from climate, we also want to talk about the lighting of the work. This is a big part of our job, is understanding the right amount of light to properly show the work, but also not giving the work too much light. So there are three things that I think about when I'm trying to light a gallery or an exhibition. One is the amount of light, which that is dependent on the material. There are some materials, like works on paper, that are more sensitive to light damage. So you want to use less light to actually display them. Works on canvas are less sensitive to light damage, so you can use more light to display them. I'm also thinking about temperature and clarity, which goes into the actual hardware that we use when we're displaying things here at the museum. So the temperature is actually kind of the color of light. It's measured in a temperature called a temperature scale rated by Kelvin. That's what the K means. So 3000 Kelvin is a little warm on the side of like neutral, like 5000 is kind of like dead center, but anything over 5000 is getting into kind of a really cool light. And anything sort of at a lower number than that is going to cast kind of a warm glow on things, and that's not really good for accurate representation of color. Clarity is really just kind of well, the CRI level is really kind of like a clarity. It's a term when you're sourcing bulbs, you just want, at a museum level, you want something that's a 90 CRI or higher. It's kind of like if you were buying a diamond, there's a clarity rating on the diamond. It's similar to that, like the clarity and the consistency of the light is at this certain level, 90 CRI. Both of those are sort of inherent, the temperature and the clarity in the bulb that you buy. So that's why it's important to get sort of good materials. But in terms of the amount and the direction and the type of light that we're putting onto work, we sort of adjust that through the fixture and screens and lenses that go into the fixture. One little thing I want to point out here with this example, you can see the large canvas painting on the right, 9 Workmen, has more light on it than the 2 works on the left, the Arshile Gorky and the Jacob Kanan works on paper. So we've kept them at a lower light level than the 9 Workmen, just because they're more sensitive to light. So Chris. So all of our artwork is lit by track lighting. And we have multiple fixtures and multiple bulbs that give us a lot of flexibility within this system. These are the smaller fixtures. They use a type of bulb. You can see down in the bottom of the right-hand photograph. That's called an MR16 style bulb. It's kind of the smaller bulb. It has 2 little prongs that stick out of the back. You can also see that the fixtures that it goes in, that it fits in, are slightly different, right? The one on the left has this scalloped edge, and that's meant for washing the walls. It's like a floodlight that's meant to wash the walls without actually lighting up the observer that's directly underneath them. So in the image on the left, you can see sort of coming down at a diagonal angle from the center of the left side, you can see a row of those scalloped edge fixtures, and they're all pointed right at the wall, right? So that's wall washing. The fixture on the right side of the right image is with the flat nose, that's a spot. So we would use a larger beam angle bulb in the flood and a smaller beam angle bulb in the spot so that we can really control directionally where that spot is going. And you can see sort of diagonally up from the center of the image on the left, a row of spots, and they're pointing at various pieces and adding this kind of detail light to the work. Some of the less lit works like that Jacob Kanan or the Arshile Gorky work on paper, they might be okay with the light given to them from the wall wash. But some other works that are more stable, more robust, and have higher light levels, we would put spotlights on them to really sort of illuminate the details. Chris, if you'll switch this over. So these are the larger fixtures that we have. They use a Par38, which you can see that in the bottom left of the left image. It looks like a normal bulb. It kind of has that normal bulb connection point, the little spiral end that you could plug into, you know, any light fixture in your house as long as the bulb would actually fit into it. On the right side is an AR111, which is, you know, a really kind of industry bulb. You actually have to wire it up with a screwdriver into these fixtures. But again, you can see the difference between the scalloped front and the flat front. So here you get a better idea that the scalloped front is really sort of pushing the light out of the fixture at a 45-degree angle and bringing it down onto the wall without sort of illuminating whoever might be standing underneath it. The best example of this one is probably the fixture furthest to the left of the left image. You can kind of see how it's scalloped on the front. This one directly to the right of it is also a scalloped front, but it's pointed at us, so it's a little harder to see. But then you also have the flat front in these larger fixtures, and it does the same thing. It focuses light on very specific details or works that we want to give more illumination. We want to give more of a spotlight focus. The main difference between the smaller MR16 filter fixtures and the larger PAR38s are the distance of throw. So we have some very tall ceilings in this museum. So we use the larger fixtures on the tallest ceilings and in the atrium where we need a really long distance throw from the fixture to the illuminated object. The MR16s are pretty good up until about 15 feet. Anything above 15 feet, I think that's about the range where we go into the larger fixtures. They just have more, they have more energy, but they use more energy. So we keep the museum more energy efficient by concentrating on the MR16s, but when we get to really high ceilings, we go up to the Par38s and the AR111s. And any of these fixtures can be manipulated with lenses and screens to adjust the total intensity of the light or the directionality of the light. Okay, Chris.
So with that being said, all light is destructive. What I mean by all light, I mean both natural light, which is the sun, and artificial light. With natural light, you rely on blinds and curtains to block out the sun, but you can't really filter that down. So you rely more on artificial light. And as Tom has just mentioned, those types of bulbs happen to be LEDs. LEDs are light emitting diode. So what that means is that they give off very little UV radiation. UV radiation is something you can't see, but can cause some detrimental effects to your artwork. So LED and some fluorescent bulbs have the low, very low UV radiation. So that's something to consider. We also, when we are trying to soften how bright some of these cans are, we will use screens, a mesh, to basically help soften how bright that image is. So for example, in both of these pictures is what we like to call a window burn. What that means is that there's been too much light on the unmatted surface. So you can see that the border is a softer tan when the actual image is more brown, a little more darker because of the fact that there's been too much light on it. So how do we determine the best way, or how do we control how much light is getting to the object? So foot candles and lux are lighting measurements. They are measurements that, again, are determined by professionals. And again, these are some of the best practices that you'll see across the board. Works on paper and photographs are very delicate. They can only get up to about 5-foot candles. And when I mean by foot candle, that means square foot. So that means that 5 candles within a square foot will eliminate that much lighting. With that being said, works on paper and photographs throughout the museum and throughout many museums are regularly changed out more than works on canvas and 3-dimensional works because, again, of the fragility of those actual paper-based works. For paintings, it's 15-foot candles. For unpainted wood and for different types of wood, I tend to stick between 20 and 30-foot candles. Glass and ceramics can handle up to 30-foot candles. Again, you can really get about as bright as you want to when it comes to foot candles. Just, you want to make sure it's maintained. If you're at 30-foot candles, it's a pretty bright spot. I mean, you know, I'm not talking about theatrical spotlighting, which would be astronomically huge. You do not want to do that. In the photo on your right is a light meter. This is a pretty affordable light meter. We got this off Amazon for just under $50. And in fact, you'll actually see that it says lux. It says 42 lux. For each foot candle means it's approximately 10 lux. So we're the only country in the world that uses foot candles. Every other country uses lux. And so I tend to use more lux than I do with foot candles. But if I was to convert from the lux to foot candles, this particular moment, it would be 4.2 foot candles for the Jacqueline Gorovich photograph that's just behind the light meter. If you are looking at wanting to purchase your own light meter, they can get as expensive as a couple $100s, and some of those light meters will actually read the UV radiation to determine if your fluorescent bulbs or whatever type of lighting you have inside your home is not giving off too much UV radiation. Can an incandescent bulb damage art? Absolutely. Incandescent bulbs are actually one of the worst bulbs, besides the fact, like tungsten, these bulbs give off a lot of heat. I would avoid that. Maybe go ahead and switch over to LED lights. LED bulbs is what I meant by, at Lowe's or Home Depot. But try to stay away from incandescent bulbs and especially tungsten. Okay, I just want to talk a little bit about pest management. So all museums have an integrated pest management system. What that means is that essentially we are being practical, we are integrating and being economic in the fact that we want to make sure that we are reducing, if not eliminating, any pests that could potentially come into the museum. All museums have, like I said, all museums have this. All museums have sticky traps in their storage. It's things behind the scenes that people don't know of, but it's a truth that pests are everywhere. And so our job is to make sure we try to eliminate that. So with sticky traps, you would put those near an entry door. So because again, you don't want them to come into your home before you catch them. You want them to be basically near an exterior door. Some common things that you'll catch in sticky traps are silverfish. Silverfish, for example, are in this image to your right. Silverfish, like the sugars, the sweets within the paper. Moths are another hassle, especially if you have quite a few textiles. I know some people rely on lavender and cedar blocks, like inside their closets, to kind of ward off that. That's a good way to help push those pests away. Those obviously lavender and cedar blocks, they give off gassing and smells, and I'm going to get into off gassing. I also wanted to cover rodent traps. Rodent traps, you're going to want to use a hinged rodent trap. You want to kill the species, or trap it inside of a cage if you are leaning more towards that direction. Do not use poison. If you use poison and the rat or mouse eats it, they could die anywhere. And if you do not find where the carcass is, it will break down and bring more pests. So again, just being practical with certain ways to prevent mice or rats from getting into your basement.
Okay, I guess I'm going to talk a little bit about the fun part, which is exhibiting your work. I mean, that's the reason that we all love artwork, because we love to see it. Not all artwork is as easy as hanging this Ruthasala that I have pictured on the right side. We have this kind of coming down from the ceiling on a tiny wire so that it feels like it's floating in air. If you've been to the museum, it's in the collection hall, and it's relating really well to these Joseph Albers chairs. But for the most part, work that you guys are hanging or work that we hang breaks into, or exhibiting breaks into two different categories. One is hanging, the other is sort of a work on a pedestal or a table. So the most common method of hanging is a wire backing. If you have a work and you take it to a professional framer, chances are that they will end up giving you a setup that sort of looks like this. There's a wire that stretches from one side to the other. I would suggest these picture hanging hooks that you can see on the left side of your screen if you're hanging from a wire. The great thing about these hooks is that they tell you the weight rating right on the package. So, you know, this box is 20 pounds. These larger ones that are off to the right side, I think those are like 80 pounds or 50 pounds. I mean, they're very heavy duty. The other great thing about these is that you don't have to hit a stud. At the art museum, we have plywood behind all of our walls, so I don't really have to think about where it is that I put a screw into the wall. I know that there's going to be structural support behind it. I know that's much different inside people's homes. So these picture hangers work to sort of come in at an angle and create more of a shear force for the wire to pull straight down, as opposed to pull out of the wall. So it's a good way to use the structural integrity of drywall for something light to hang on the wire. In this picture, you can also see that these professional framers have strung this wire through these little pieces of hardware that kind of look like arrowheads. They're called D-rings. Chris, if you'll switch us to the next one. So D-rings are kind of the hanging method of choice in art museums. We don't string wires between them. We usually just put screws in the wall and hang the D-rings directly on the screw heads. This is a much more precise way. We can really zero in on where exactly we want the piece, and it won't move. If you've ever hung something on a wire, you know that you can push it one way or another and it'll come out of level. It'll kind of shift a little bit. Well, this is a really precise and exact way to put a painting on a wall exactly where you want it to be. Let's see. Why don't you flip over again, Chris? Yeah. One other option is a cleat. Some people have come across cleats before, but they're a really great way to have the work, especially if it's a heavier work, be supported, but also lean flat against the wall. As we were talking about those picture hangers earlier, if you use the picture hangers on the wires, then usually there's a little bit of a cavity behind the work, so the picture hangers can kind of sit in there and the work still hangs flat against the wall. If you use those picture hangers just on the D-rings, sometimes it will push the work out from the wall and kind of make the top proud. That's something that a cleat really gets around, because you can see in the left picture, there's the bottom piece of the cleat that I'm holding with my hand. It has these holes in it, so you would screw it directly into the wall. And then you bring the work up above it and slide it down the wall until they fit together like they are in the right side. So the work will be held directly against the wall. It will also use this kind of shear force to keep from pulling the screws out of the wall. If you have a heavy piece and you're going to use a cleat, I would suggest that you find some kind of structure in your wall. At least hit a stud, you know, for one of the screws. If your cleat is big enough to span 2 studs, then that's even better. But that will give you a lot of support, and you can hang really heavy pieces with something like that. A lot of cleats are built into the frames, and like this piece is actually built into the frame around this photograph, but there are a few aftermarket cleats that you can add on as long as you have a little bit of room in the back to screw something on. I think one brand might be called a Z-clip. They're long, thin metal cleats that work in the same way, where they come together and sort of one side goes on the wall, one side goes on the work, and they cinch together as you put the piece on the wall. Okay, Chris. In terms of displaying 3-dimensional work, most all of the work, unless it's hanging from the ceiling like the Ruthasawa, we put it onto a pedestal or a platform or some kind of small riser furniture that goes within the pedestal. All of that stuff is painted wood. So it doesn't really matter how long ago you painted the wood. If you sit an object on it for 3 months, that paint will stick to the object. So we always put a barrier between the object and the painted surface. So this is called Mylar. It's another archival material similar to the Tyvek, except that it's very thin and it's easy to cut. So it comes on a roll, but we usually outline the footprint of a piece. I don't remember exactly which piece that is off the top of my head, but we outline the piece on a normal sheet of paper. I lay Mylar down on top of that outline, and then I've cut it out with an X-Acto knife. So it's hard to see, but in my hand, I have this sort of oblong shape cut out of the Mylar, and I'll slide that directly under the piece that has that footprint, and it'll create a non-transferable barrier between that piece and the paint. You know, you're really asking for problems if you set anything directly on paint for 3 months, no matter how long ago you painted it. So that's crucial that we sort of put that invisible barrier between our objects and our painted display furniture. Chris? Okay, so I'm going a little faster because I know we're getting close to the hour, but I wanted to touch a little bit on storage. So what do you do with the artwork when it's not on display? We have 2 really great storage units that we call vaults. We call them that because they're safe and secure. We built these new vaults when we moved back in. They have lots of really interesting and specialized furniture that helps us hang the artworks. The Institute of Museum and Library Sciences awarded us a grant that we used to outfit our vaults when we moved back in. But the main things that we have in there are painting screens, similar to the ones that you see in this photograph. We have very large painting screens, and they move laterally, so they sort of create aisles between them. They don't pull out the way that a lot of painting screens do. And that's just a better use of our space and allows us to get, you know, more artwork safely secured in a smaller space. I'm showing you these example images because as part of security, it's really not safe to kind of advertise what your vaults look like or where your work is. And so within those same vaults, we also have flat files, which are used to safely store unframed works on paper, photographs, drawings. These are also light fast, which is, you know, really nice. Chris was talking about light and how it's always destructive, and a work of art has a lifetime of light. And every time you bring it out, every time you show it, you cut that off. So when you're resting it, you want it to be in total darkness. The other thing that we have a lot of, which is less exciting, are these shelving units, which are really great for our objects because we can manipulate them, change their height, and have things sitting safely and securely throughout our storage units.
Okay, so we're starting to run close to time, so I'm gonna speed through these. So going back real quick, we have on-site vaults, which is nice. I've worked for museums where the vault was off-site. It's more difficult to maintain. You know, some of these preventive conservation points. There are a number of archival products out there. I won't get into all of these. So acid-free paper, what that means is that it's paper that has had lignin, which is an organic, naturally compound within all of wood and plants. So what that means is that when it's acid-free, that means it has undergone additional removing of that lignin. That's one reason why archival products are so expensive, because it's going through these additional points. So we use acid-free tissue paper. Interleaving paper means that there's a separate between, you don't want to lay one flat 2D work on top of another. You want to have that, again, some type of acid-free paper between them. This is a photo box. This is an example of where when we have work that is backed using backing board, archivally safe backing board, as well as mat board, they're placed in photo boxes such as this. Again, there's interleaving paper between the matting and the work. One of these companies that are archival safe are Gaylord Archival. As you can see in the bottom right of the box, it says acid lignin free. Again, that's what you want. It also says that it's buffered. Buffered means that the pH level is beyond the neutral 7.0, which means that there is either magnesium carbonate or calcium carbonate added to that paper. It acts as an additional shield. Eventually that shield will die down and it will just become unbuffered acid-free paper. Not all works are safe for buffered paper. When in doubt, rely on unbuffered paper, unbuffered acid-free paper. This is inside the box. As you can see, these are trays. These are compartments that have, these are our miniature Cherokee baskets. It's compartmentalized in order to make sure that no objects rub against another object. As you can see, there's acid-free tissue to prevent the object from rattling inside the tray or box. Non-archival products are pretty much over-the-counter type stuff. Newsprint, I would not recommend wrapping anything in newspaper. Newspapers they're affordable because they're cheap and they're cheaply made. So you don't want to wrap glass or ceramics in newspaper print. So try to avoid that. On your left is an image of polyurethane, which is like memory foam. You do not want to, this stuff does not last long term. So when I mean memory foam, I mean basically probably what your bed is made out of. It's not good long term. It off-gasses. This particular work, so anytime a work comes into the museum, it undergoes a condition report. What that means is that I inspect the entire area of the work. So what happened, this work came in, it was matted, the mat was removed, and as you can see, the mat was not acid-free. So what it did is essentially it made the borders of the sheet of paper brown, and you can see the image up here is white. That's a good example. So basically it's the opposite of window burn, it's mat burn. Inherent vice, I won't get into that. Okay, so off-gassing real quickly. Sorry to be running through these as we ran out of time. Oak and chestnut. So oak is the worst type of wood. Almost all wood off-gasses. You do not want to encase quilts, delicate objects in wood trunks. I house many of my collection in display cabinets. Long-term effects are going to be issues with that. Like I said, if you visit other museums, especially older museums like over in Europe, a lot of them have very wooden display cabinets. The off-gassing is horrendous. So try to mitigate the off-gassing by using some of these archival products like acid-free backing board to encase, to basically push out these things. Paints. When you paint a room, there are volatile organic compounds that come off of that. You're going to want the VOCs to be very low, and you're going to want to allow the paint to dry long enough. This basically is just a good summary of everything we've covered. With quilts, you're going to want to tri-fold, minimize as many folds as possible. Rolling is optimal. If you can roll it, it prevents any type of folding, because over time the fold and the stitching will come unhinged. Where to display, you're going to want to avoid hanging any type of work, any type of painting or two-dimensional work over top of the fireplaces. Avoid exterior walls, because humidity and temperature isn't very controlled, especially with it being outdoors. And even with the insulation, you're worried about that fluctuation. Also, try to avoid hanging near sunlight. And if it is hanging near a lighting source, just make sure it's not there for a long amount of time. And then where to store, you're going to want to avoid storing in your basement. Basements have a lot of humidity. And so if you do have a lot of things that of memorabilia in your basement, make sure you have a dehumidifier down there. Avoid hanging in your attic. You can see there's a painting on the right side and a couple of silver gelatin photographs on the left side of the window. That heat rises, so that room is not very climate controlled. So you're worried about heat, which heat actually increases the long-term, it decreases the life of the work. And so last we want to end it with conservation. If you have gone through the preventive conservation steps we've just gone through, and you're noticing mold or things that need actual professional assistance, I would recommend looking up local conservators using the American Institute for Conservation. And then these are some of the archival resources we use, such as Gaylord Archival. Talus is actually ran by conservators, so it's another safe program, another safe resource to use. And that's all we have for you guys today.
Great, thank you. If anyone has any last questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. But Tom and Chris, that was really wonderful. I think whether items in our collection could be seen in a museum or are just valuable to us for personal reasons, it's great to know how to preserve the life of them and keep them safe. So we really appreciate you guys going over all this with us. And it looks like Blaze is asking something about inherent vice.
So real quickly, inherent vice means that the object is made using non-archival products. A lot of outsider art, things that aren't, again, so if you're not using, if the printmaker didn't use like 100% cotton rag, and what I mean by 100% cotton rag, that means that the paper is guaranteed to last 100 years. If you're using an acidic-based paper, that paper, even with you reducing the light, reducing the temperature and humidity, you're going to be worried about it breaking down on itself. So a lot of insurers won't cover inherent vice because the object was never made to last as long as it has.
Great, thanks, Chris. Well, thank you all so much again for participating. If you have any last questions for Chris or Tom, you can feel free to email them to me or find their contact information on our website. I'll send out a program evaluation in just a little bit, and a reminder that a recording of this program will be sent out tomorrow in our e-blast. So if you missed anything or want to jot anything down that you didn't have a chance to before, you'll be able to see it again. And also we will continue scheduling these member-only programs every week until we reopen, so keep looking out for your emails every Monday. So thank you again, Tom and Chris, that was wonderful, and thank you to our members. I hope you all stay safe and well in the coming week. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.